Arky, I'm so happy that you are on my podcast today. Thank you so much for taking the time to get up early in Australia to have this conversation with me all the way in Norway. I'm really grateful. I am super excited to talk to you because in your profile you're talking about stoicism, you're talking about the difference between men and women, you're talking about understanding yourself better, all things that I am very fascinated with. And you also had in your profile that you were fascinated by why people think, react, and live so differently from one another. And I would love to hear what you mean when you say that.
Oh, no, absolutely. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm Arky Jones, and fundamentally, I've founded a system called the Archetypical Spectrum Model, which led to a website called Personality Peak. And my entire process has been around trying to explain to people because what I found with personality tests is that a lot of people get the label and then they say, I am this or I am that. And even though I enjoyed personality tests such as the Big Five, Myers-Briggs, I found them to be, people would see them rightly or wrongly as kind of that define them. And what I wanted to do is show people that actually we are so much deeper than we can possibly imagine, but also that the self of today is not the self of 5 years ago, and it's not the self of even tomorrow. And so, therefore, by understanding our patterns of where we are right now, the behaviors that we have at this moment, what I'm hoping to do with my work is to demonstrate to people that change is definitely possible no matter where you are in life. That doesn't mean you need to always change everything. It just means that acknowledging that working towards a better self is something that isn't static, it's ongoing.
So when you, at some point, you've discovered that people are acting differently, they are reacting differently, and their lives are very different. And I can only assume that your life has led you down a path that arrived to that conclusion. Do you want to talk about how that came to be?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's really interesting in that I'm 44 now. This would have happened when I was in my early 20s when my first child was born. And so there was a change in my brain. I mean, people can call it like, your neural pathways, or people call it neuroplasticity with the change of the brain, the way the signals talk to each other, and the effectively a different direction
Right.
on the deeper self. And what happened was that before the child was born, even though because we were married, that your life was more based around like alcohol and making sure you had short-term fun, short-term pleasure. And as this baby was holding my arms, I realized I wanted to dedicate my life to ensuring that the child had a better opportunity than I did, but I didn't quite understand why. And then as life went on and you committed more time to basically trying to be the role model that you wanted to be, I realized that you could continuously modify your behavior. You could continuously take actions today that led to consequences tomorrow that built not only just stability, but built kind of adventure, but a purposeful adventure into the life. And fundamentally, it accumulated somewhere around about 30 to about 14 years ago. I started to write a book called Applied Stoicism, which was it was published through just self-published through Amazon and all that jazz. And what with the Applied Stoicism, it was like, okay, this is a framework that I can use, but it isn't the answer. And that was kind of when I started, okay, what is next? And so the next bit was like, how can I map my pattern accurately right now? Like hold a mirror to the self right now, but also see my, how can you say it, see my blind spots, because you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
Celebrate my strengths, but also look at ways that I can continually grow in a framework that offers honest feedback in real time. And
Right.
so that was the idea of the model, that it was across 6 dimensions. So, for example, Myers-Briggs 4 dimensions, Big Five, the name gives away 5 dimensions. The 6 dimensions I felt was a nice balance because you can end up this in the fun part of it. So the game of life,
Right.
in this particular test, you can end up with 64 possible outcomes. Now, that doesn't necessarily define you, but what it does, it gives you a broader base so you can identify nuances within there that you can work on. But more importantly, what I did is I didn't like it's called the liked it system, where it's yes, no, maybe, somewhat, fully, and then the other system's kind of a number system, 1 to 10. And I didn't feel that defined as well as it could. So I developed a system that you dragged it to the exact percentage that you believe you feel at that time, and then basically the other thing is that if you log in, it's included in the service for free. You can
Right.
actually then retake that over time, and you can not only see your exact percentages over time, but you can also see if you've modified your behavior, your personality changes your archetype.
Got you. So what you're essentially explaining here is that whenever you're taking the test, especially compared to other personality tests that are out there, you're led to leave with certain questions to ask, and it's these buckets, right? Whereas what you're offering is, where do you fall in the spectrum of this percentage? And that's actually quite interesting that you're mentioning, because I've thought about that before, where I'm like, can I pick somewhere in between these two? And that's exactly what this is offering. So I do find that interesting. So did you ever have like a moment in your life that kind of, okay, so you're referring to this, to the birth of your son as a defining moment in your life, but is that the sole reason, or did you have kind of a journey that allowed to conclude that you really wanted to dive further into the personality types of it all?
Oh no, 100%. So the I guess the reason I give that example so far ago, that definitely didn't take me in this direction exactly right then. What it did though is it showed me that there was something in us that we thought was fixed that
Yeah,
wasn't fixed, and so the curiosity grew. There'd been other things earlier in life. For example, I basically was on my own from 16, and in times like that. So, for example, say you ran with a big group of friends, or so, guys from where you were from,
yeah,
and you often realize that a lot. I don't know where this came from. I think it was because of hardship that you realize that you often did things because you were seeking an external validation,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
but but the more what I realized is the more I chased external validation, the more I was left wanting, because no one could ever fulfill me. It had to come from me. And then basically the brain step was like, oh, wow, I've got something to commit my life to. And that was the early step. And then as you went through, I had times of where you felt, say, nervous, or money was tight, or, for example, really small examples was, say the boss says, I need to talk to you in the office now.
Mm,
And the first response is kind of a adrenaline dump. Your sympathetic nervous system increases the blood flow away from the brain to the muscles, and you end up with like effectively something that was designed to keep us safe from saber-toothed tigers running away in a situation where our life is not at risk. But
right,
at the same time, it changed the way you think. It changed the way that you could answer questions. Mouth went dry, and it wasn't, again, it was all these little things, and I was piecing clues together. And then finally, I would find that although I could get along with people reasonably well, I found that there were certain types of people that I felt uneasy around. And I don't mean necessarily nasty people, just certain traits, certain personalities, certain ways of thinking that I felt uneasy around. Oh, and I wanted to understand that a bit better as well, because one of the biggest things that I was aware of is that no matter how much we want to be individual, sovereign, we want our soul to be completely defined, that it is not definable, because part of being human is living in a society, living in a community, living with other people.
right,
And so, in understanding myself, understanding what made me tick, understanding my blind spots, I could then actually understand other people more. And
right,
then the biggest one probably was not giving ownership of the self, the
right.
only thing I can truly control, away to other people.
Right. I mean, that is such a good point. I mean, I was kind of imagining this whole community or society as you're talking about this, and looking at it through the lens of like, what would that look like when it's a lot of hostile people that is inwards and insecure and always projecting and reacting as opposed to understanding. And I could actually kind of see a little bit like something resembling an environment that I grew up in, really, where it wasn't really honest, or almost like maybe like high school. It's like nobody is really honest. Nobody really knows where they are or who they are. They're just responding to the environment around them. And that uneasy feeling that you're referencing, I definitely felt that, just because I always had this sense of being too much or having too much, but not really knowing how to put that out there. So I didn't have a lot of friends, and that was really hard for me. But it's like, or real friends, I should emphasize, I suppose. But
Mm-mm-mm-mm.
yeah, it just, you painted this picture as you were talking, and I felt like sharing that. But I do want to dial it back a little bit when you were referring to your relationship with becoming a father. What is the first thing that pops up into your head when I'm asking you, what is the most important thing that you've learned about becoming a father to a son?
Yeah, so I've got a few kids, but the for me, what it was is that there is something that's in the world now who you are not only the role model, not only the protector, not only the carer, not only the provider, but you have a responsibility to not take ownership of them beyond what is absolutely necessary to give them a good start in life.
Mm.
And I think a lot of people throughout the world, they see their family as something that they own, they can control, they can dictate to.
Yeah.
And I wasn't necessarily fond of that journey because for me, the power that you have is something that should be used in a way that brings everybody up with you. And so, thus, if you can understand the self and control the self the best you can, it allows you to ask questions as to your deeper motivations.
Mm.
And I would always try to orientate my motivations to their growth, their opportunities, but also to the best I possibly can, because I'm aware of the limitations of even the mind, the human body, the environment that we live in. But to the best I possibly can, to allow them to become who they want to become, but while having guidance in place. So it was checking myself that I wasn't living vicariously through them. I wasn't putting, when I say putting my values on them, of course, you need to put your values on them, but putting my values on them, but be willing to question on my own values,
Mm.
be willing to understand that their experience of the world is different to mine,
Yeah.
and being willing to modify. And one of the most important things was when I was a kid, I never heard sorry once, no matter what happened.
Yeah.
Whereas be willing to reflect and be willing to say sorry when I was wrong. And so I think that to have self mastery is accepting what you can control and letting go of what you can't control.
Right.
And I think that when I say forming a partnership with your children, I think that was my aim, is that at the end of this process, I want them to look back and want to spend time with me because I'm a value add to their life, not a value take away.
That is a really beautiful way of putting it, and I can completely understand that. I have such a great relationship with my mom, and there's like I always want to hang out with my mom. There's never a good, like, never, nothing would take away from that. And I completely understand wanting to have that relationship with your kids because it's so unique and it's really beautiful. So, what this leads me to wonder is, was there any element of your upbringing where your parents kind of made it more limitations, or were kind of trying to project onto you some sort of ideal that led you to wanting to kind of create this flexibility or this openness within your own parenting to your children?
Somehow in my life, I've always been able to recognize patterns. It's just been a gift from the longest time I remember. And I've always struggled with, never mind just the parents, but with teachers, with other adults, with contradictions within not just the words, but with the actions and the deeds, and then the consequences of such.
Right.
And so basically, because of that, you would see things, let's say, for example, that, you know, that saying, say as I do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
Okay. Even as a young fella, I couldn't understand that because I felt like following blindly without understanding why, or doing something that made you feel not great about yourself but without a real sacrifice, just because someone told you to,
Right.
was quite bothersome. And so as I became an adult, those patterns carried on, but in a way that I had more control over.
Right.
But ultimately, what I realized that as you achieved more autonomy, the heavier the burden, the heavier the challenge I was willing to take on, the more fulfilled my life was. And then when I made those challenges my own, and then I put my attention in the direction I wanted to go, but be willing to check my attention. I started to realize that the one of the most important assets, and unfortunately it's become a product, is my attention and other people's attention. It's one of the most important things in the world, and where you put your attention is the way you go. And
Right.
so I think I'm not trying to get around your question. It's just that the truth is that what they taught me was that you need to respect other people's attention, but
Right.
also respect your own.
Yeah.
And then the direction you look is the way you walk.
Yeah. No, I mean it's pretty simple, really, right? When you
Mm.
think about it. So you said that you have several kids. Do you have daughters and sons?
So, son and daughter, yeah, yeah, yeah. They're already in university now. It flies by the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So I've kind of been really curious myself lately in this whole universe of the differences between men and women. And it's almost as if it's a little bit scary to talk about these days because, yeah, I really, really don't mean anything other than the fact that I want to understand women because I am a woman. I want to
Mm.
understand men because I love men. I am a heterosexual woman that want to understand men. I am a daughter who wants to have a relationship with her father, and I'm a sister who wants to understand her brothers. So that's essentially where it's coming from. And I wonder if, with your own experience in raising a daughter and raising a son, what are some main differences that can be valuable to understand about men and women?
I mean, I'll speak very specifically in my case, just to avoid the same things that you've mentioned, Maggie. I don't want to overgeneralize anybody
Yeah.
in any way, but I think that what one thing that I would try to celebrate is that there is, let's even move to just feminine and masculine, okay?
Sure.
Because
Yeah.
you can have women with masculine traits and men with feminine traits.
Absolutely.
So if we keep it along those lines, I would say that where men have a strength is in and the masculine trait has a strength is that it's very good at creating order, but and kind of bringing things in. But the problem with creating order, the problem with that responsibility, the masculine responsibility, is that you want to impose order on the world around you because you want to make it safe for your tribe, for your people, for
Right.
your immediate community.
Right.
And this is where that you, for example, you always need, let's say, let's go back to we're in a tribe of 150 people, we're in a forest,
Right.
and we're hunter gatherers, okay? So this is what
Right.
it comes back to lower brain. And there might be a newcomer that comes to the tribe. The masculine side may be adverse to the newcomer coming in, whereas the feminine side might want to give them a chance. Now, both have got merit. The masculine side, this could be a spy from another camp. It could be an intruder. It could be someone that wants to impose their will on this village. The feminine side actually opens doors because they could bring new knowledge. Let's say, for example, they've got a new cooking technique, they've got a new hunting technique, they know new traps.
Mhm.
So there's merit in empathy. There's also merit in the conservatism, in the kind of blocking of the empathy because you want to protect what exists as it is. And so that's one very small example of where you've got merits to both on an even more human level. A man might be willing a heavy masculine trait. Let's say one of your tribe gets injured, and it is slowing you down in the winter, and this is something that could affect the whole tribe. The masculine side would be more willing to leave that person, unfortunately, to die if it saved the tribe, whereas the feminine side would actually lean towards saving it, even at this cost to the self. But if you were to save that person and they do live, then the whole tribe is stronger because they know they've got your back.
Right.
Whereas if but there's also a chance because of that action, everybody dies. And so it's if you look at the left and the right, that both have got merits. The problem is in the modern world, the reason I'm reluctant to say it is in the modern world, those basic needs have been taken care of, but you can extrapolate out what I've said into anything. And so having too much empathy can be really, really, really detrimental to the self and to the local community. But
Right.
having not enough empathy closes the door to many, many opportunities. And that's just one side of it. But like you can talk about like cooking, cleaning, you can talk about like maintenance of the property, all that in the modern world. But what it comes down to is one is trying to secure the now based on what they know, conservatism kind of principles and preservation. One is empathetic in not only that, but the reason for that is because that empathy can lead to better future outcomes if things go well.
Yeah.
Does that? I know it's a bit of
No,
it's a bit abstract, but it makes sense.
it does make sense, especially because I've been reading up on that same kind of universe of things. It's just that, like, I have been hung up on different examples. An example of this can be like in explaining the masculine and feminine, or the hunter and the gatherer, when the hunters are typically more single focused and oriented on the task ahead, and that is the only focus until the task is complete, essentially. And that goes also into kind of this hustler mindset that a lot of the masculine can identify with or recognize, I suppose. Whereas the gatherer are the ones with diffuse awareness. They don't actually focus, they're actually just hyper aware of their surroundings. And I think the instinct was, the way I remember it being explained to me, was how as a gatherer you're always looking out for safety, and as a woman that's something I relate to a very feminine, on a very feminine side of things, is that what I always what I'm constantly striving for is safety, emotional safety, physical safety. And whereas the gatherers in this kind of example were the ones who know where the good berries were, where the poisonous mushrooms were, where the tiger is hiding, they know all of this because of their diffuse awareness. And it can always look out for the safety aspect of it, whereas the hunter is the one that needs the freedom to keep you safe, the freedom to go out and fight and do the violent thing, to be on task and focus on only that, because at the end of the day, what they want to do is protect and they want to provide. Is
Yeah,
that similar to what you've read as well?
yeah. And then of course you can then say the gatherer is more the feminine traits and the masculine traits is more the hunter.
Right.
There's
Yeah.
crossovers, but that's what it comes down to. No, I agree. And then any of that you can extrapolate out all the way
Yeah.
to time allocation, work allocation. I think where I will say though that the modern world has changed the value proposition
Yeah.
is one, it's created relative safety in the Western world. So
Yeah.
we no longer have to, the wolves will come, but they come very, very rarely. So it's not
Yeah.
on our mind that the wolves are coming anymore.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing. But the problem with the times being the way they are is that it does blur the roles, because
It does.
if you bring into a society that now, let's forget male and female, you need both people to work just to pay a mortgage, just to pay rent, just to raise a family, then both of them are out in the world hunting, because what they're doing is, but in this case, is both of them, instead of one partner sacrificing their time to give their child or their community the best possible opportunity in life, both partners are out bringing in money. What money represents in the modern world is stored time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, because you've sacrificed time in the past, if you're a wage earner, and then you use that money in the future for your activities.
Right.
Now, the other thing where the game has changed recently is that we now take loans at interest, and then both partners generally have to then work to pay that back with the interest back. And so what that does is it gives an equal footing, which is fine. But then if you've got two hunters, who's taking care of the nest?
Mm-hmm.
Now, up until recently, there was a transition period around the 80s to 90s where the females continued to do all the homework and worked as well, which is ridiculous. And so while it's balancing out, as we've become so orientated to gathering the actual resources to survive, we
Mm-hmm.
have less time to focus on things like local community. And I don't know about you, Maggie, but like when I was a kid, my nan particularly would always have like a big group of women around the house. They'd be doing knitting, talking. They'd know exactly what was going on in the local community. And that seems to happen less and less and less now. And as they've nuclearized the family, they've made people more isolated in groups. They've also told you through consumerism that you need a bigger house, you need a nicer car, you need to spend money, you need to take loans and buy things you can't afford. You're then forcing both people into the resource gathering, immediate resource gathering just to survive. And then I think this is where the lines have been blurred in the modern world. Because in truth, the symbiosis, the unity is throughout the universe, the kind of symmetry. And a proper male and feminine is exactly the same as a yin and yang. And that balance has been a little bit distorted.
Yeah, I mean, you're touching upon so many things that I have wanted to shed a light on lately. I think you're explaining it beautifully as well because I feel seen, whereas I'm also not triggered, which is a beautiful place to be, I suppose. And I completely understand what it is that you're referencing, and some of the ways in which I've been trying to think about it lately as I've been learning more about this is that like, okay, instead of being upset with men for not wanting to commit, for instance, because that's a narrative I created when I was heartbroken. And instead of thinking that, like, oh, I'm so needy and I want so much, or I'm so hormonal, I'm so whatever negative aspect of being a woman I could think of, when I started to understand more about the gatherers, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just instincts. I can't even help it. Oh my goodness, that is so useful information for me. And I'm sure that a lot of people can find themselves on the spectrum of either, right? Back to this percentage scale that you're talking about. It's like you're not all the way here, you're not all the way there either. You can have masculine trait, you can have feminine trait. That doesn't mean you can also have masculine and feminine energies in a homosexual couple. It's not about
Mhm.
gender. It's just about how are you showing up in your energy and what creates the harmony that builds the village, essentially, right? It
Yeah.
starts with the family for us, but then it expands, right? And to not be so afraid of recognizing what these traits are so that I can use it to my advantage today and feel as a part of an inclusive environment and not being questioned as an identity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when I say this, I say it metaphorically. I don't say it literally, okay?
Yeah,
The biggest trick the devil ever pulled was to create disharmony.
yeah,
And so balance is everywhere. I mean, if you look up at the Milky Way, if you're lucky enough to be in a place where there's not light pollution and you can see the Milky Way, and there is a symmetry in the universe it is known without words needing to be spoke just by looking. And that comes down to balance in life. So one reason that the way that the way that we are, whatever you believe our origins are, it doesn't matter. That
right,
there is a male and there is a female,
right,
okay? And therefore that when we stop celebrating balance, when we stop celebrating the roles of what the people are capable of,
right,
then we kind of then live in a state of a little bit of confusion. Because for me, one thing that I personally will never ever be able to do is have a baby, say. And somewhere along the way, we've been told that money, you need to be stable before you have a family. This is the Western thing, yeah.
right,
Whereas if you look at countries, let's say like Nigeria, where they still have a really, really healthy birth rate, they still have that symbiotic relationship where male, female, the female will have more children and then form the family. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying that for most of human evolution, that was the way it was. And then in the modern world, you've now got two people who have to go out and get the resources. And what that's done, I believe, is create a bit of disharmony in the self because it's not about roles. It's like you said, what you feel it deep in the bones
right,
it is partly about biology, but also partly about we don't celebrate this enough in the West, but other cultures do. It's about shared history and it's about oral tradition. So
mhm,
things are passed down generationally, and there's some stuff that we take for granted, such as we don't harm people, we don't hurt people, we don't do physical violence on people, unless it's self-defense. That is not self-evident in Genghis Khan's age.
mhm,
That's not self-evident, and it was normalized. And so what's happened is that as our society's values have evolved, the core biology is still there. So what we need to do is, I think that if we could celebrate more the diversity within us all, but also that means also diversity of thought. And I think that when we start to shut down like what can and can't be done, how we should think, how we shouldn't think, part of it is because you are literally just trying to survive, to keep a roof over your head, to keep food in the mouth, to keep making the payments.
Right.
And that's not normal. But also part of it is because how we've been conditioned.
Mhm.
We've been told that we can be validated through driving a nice, shiny car. We've been told that we can be validated by having a bigger house. We've been told our clothes can validate how other people think. But all of that is ultimately meaningless when it comes down to it. And
Right.
what actually matters is connection with other people.
Yeah. Who are you without the flash? Like who are you without anything of the facade? Do you even have a personality worth engaging with? I think these are things that are important to consider too, is that are you, yeah, what value do you bring with just being your entire personality as opposed to what resources you're providing? Not to say that resources aren't valuable, of course they are, but I think what you're saying is that our focus has changed with time and we're deriving away from what is actually valuable. And I agree with it because I can feel it so deeply especially when I think about times in my life where I've been the absolute happiest on like a very genuine level. It is when I am surrounded by the people that I love and when we are doing things that are meaningful. So community is important. And something that I've thought about lately in moving back to Norway too, because I used to live in the US for 7, 8 years and on and off, but long enough, and been in Norway for half a year now, which is my home country where I grew up. But what I've found is that the cultures are so different. Like in the US, it's very common to be out and about and with people and pick up a conversation with a stranger. Whereas in Norway, you don't talk to people you know on the bus. You're sitting alone. You're talking to no one. You have your headphones in, and we're just very publicly shy, is what I'm understanding. And it led me to understand why I felt so out of place in Norway, because I remember coming to the US and someone was talking to me on the bus and I was like, we're having a conversation on the bus? And it was this excitement because there was no rules against it and I was in this new place and I could reinvent myself. So coming home has been hard because somehow I want to make myself seamless, but I'm also in the process of expanding and building something that I deem valuable. So it is this tricky place where in the US I feel like I can be all of me and it's no problem and no one is shaming me. Whereas when I'm here, I'm like, oh my God, is people watching? So it's really interesting that just the environment you find yourself in, if it's in this country or that country, you can be two completely different people. And it is solely based on essentially the frequencies you're picking up on around you. It's like it's not like I was choosing it. It just happens when you're here for a long enough. And that's true when I go back to the US too. I just forget about all of that and I'm back to being Maggie.
I would say, look, there is definite truth in that, and obviously cultures have different variables within the culture. I would say that how I do mitigate that slightly
Hmm.
is by if I choose to smile at somebody and
Right.
they choose not to smile back,
Mm.
I'm still grateful that I smiled at them.
Yeah.
Because I can only control my action.
True.
If I offer to help someone and they decline it, I never take it personally
Mhm.
because the only thing I can own is my actions, my thoughts, where I put my attention. And so, where I admit that you would get beat down if 1,000 times out of 1,000 that you sit on a bus and you try to engage someone and they don't respond. It's true, and that in that case you'd be almost crazy to continue. However, again, if you want to say hello to someone, then I would always recommend saying hello as long as it's safe to do so. You're in a safe place like a bus.
Yeah.
Say hello and own that to its fullest because that is you. And if the other person chooses not to respond, that is beyond your control. But you've gone to the fullest that you can do for what you want to do at that time. It doesn't mean there's any right or wrong way, but I think that if we start fully acting in a way that we think we should, as opposed to what's true to ourselves, then we that again would change our personality. And on that personality note, I will just say this, that when you're with your mother, when you're with your friends, when you're at work, when you're at home alone, when you're with your kids, you actually do have different personality, and people don't celebrate that enough. But if you really, really think about it, you regulate yourself all the time. And what I would suggest is trying to find the attributes about yourself that you like the most and are the most they have the most social benefits, so other people respond well to them, and then work on them. But also, let's say someone's superpower is that they have ideas very quickly.
Right.
So let's say that's one of your superpowers, that you can see patterns, you can solve things quickly. Occasionally, how about you don't solve it immediately and let someone else come through
Mm,
and let them share their ideas. And then you'll find, in stepping back, even in your strengths, you learn new things, you see new approaches. And that for me has been one of the biggest things about personality, is it is understanding the self, but building a framework that allows me to maximally engage with my local community while not deferring ownership of myself or my feelings to those other people.
yeah. I mean, it's such a good point, and it's like you're challenging me in a point where I'm like, oof, this would be hard for me because it's really funny that you're mentioning it, because it's as if like when I am in the US and I feel this free side of it, I don't even think about it, I don't even question it. But I grew up here, I have trauma here, I have wounds here, I have programming that is kind of shaping the way that I perceive being perceived or just project being perceived, and there's some fear attached to it, and then it's easier to just fall into old habits of just like, you know what, nobody here is talking anyway, so I don't actually have to either. It's almost as if like when you were saying that, well, if you want to be a person who says hi to people on the bus, I was like, but I don't even want to here, but I do want to elsewhere.
Mm-mm.
So it's almost as if it's because it's here, because I have all this programming, it would be harder. But that being said, my brother, my sister-in-law, and I, we moved back home with my parents recently within the year because well, we've been gone for so long, and we it was just a good time. So we're all living back home in our childhood home, and my brother with his wife, and it's really beautiful, but we are missing community. And we were talking about it the other day. Should we just do the least Norwegian thing and invite everyone to like a party and just see if people show up and that we get to know our neighbors? So it is like a brewing idea because we do want to know our neighbors. Like, mind you, we barely speak to our neighbors. Like, how is that even possible? That's insane. We essentially chose the same place to live our lives, and we're not even talking to the person next door. We are to some extent, but not like we're not doing things together. We're just like having friendly conversation in the driveway, you know?
So this is just fundamentally what's happened is that the society, in this particular case, the
Right.
society has established that you guys are able to fulfill your basic needs without relying on each other. And what that means is that you guys can eat, you've got shelter, you can pay your bills, you have enough spare money that if you need an electrician, you pay someone, you need a plumber, you pay someone. So the one thing I will say, in like poorer communities where there isn't enough money, where there isn't enough stored capital meaning stored time from previous sacrifice, and that's no one's fault, it's where you're born, you are forced into relying on each other more and more. Also, I think that the cultures then evolve into their microcosms. But I'm almost certain that if there was a fire, I'm almost certain, Maggie, that your neighbors would still rally around to pull you out the
Oh,
house.
for
Do
sure.
you know what I mean? And so,
Yeah.
and then, and you would communicate deeply in those moments. And so the thing is, if you take away life challenges, if you take away, and when I say this, I use pain carefully, but if you take away pain points in society and you make everything comfortable, a bit too comfortable, there is actually a very, very deep comfort in solitude. But that solitude is only available when there isn't barbarians knocking at the door. And the barbarians are a metaphor for societal challenges that you need to unite together to overcome. And that's why, by actually understanding yourself the best you can, the same as a rising tide raises all ships, by you being the best you, but not just based on what you want, based on what brings other people up around you. The same as the rising tide, other people will come up around you. But even if they don't, there's nothing more you could have done because you've owned yourself to the fullest.
Yeah. I mean, we are only responsible for ourselves at the end of the day. We can't really do so much other and or so much else. And you do bring on some really important perspectives here that I hadn't thought about. And that comfortable part is also a word that is coming up a lot more lately when it comes to Europe and European countries, especially in war times, where we really are so comfortable. So it is something about this. Yeah, we got so comfortable. We didn't have to worry, and we really didn't have to exit the solitude either, really. And it's only now that we're becoming to questioning more. But yeah, thank you so much for your perspective. I think you're bringing so much value here. Is there anything we haven't talked about yet that you want to talk about?
What I will say just for my final words is that with my personality test, it is designed to be fun. It is designed to be a game. And it's been built over well over a decade, and it's been consolidated within the last 12 months. And so you will be able to get a good insight into yourself, a snapshot in time. You can sign up, you can stay with us. There's more you can do, but no hard sells here. It's just personalitypeak, peek.com. Please check it out.
Right.
Now, what I will tell you in life is that whatever began where we are now has always been.
Right.
And let's call that infinite potential. Infinite potential existed before time, before the universe, before whatever. That same infinite potential that created the stars, created the moon, created the planets, is the same stuff that created us. And therefore, you can ask yourself this question: if I don't put my attention towards something, does it exist to me? And so, if and it doesn't, so therefore, where you put your attention is the direction your world will go in. So if you focus on things that are beyond your control, that are something that you cannot action, you are destined for a life of deep dissatisfaction. Whereas if you put your attention on actionable things that you can do,
Right.
very small things can be like if the sink is full of dishes and it's bothering you, clean the dishes. If a bill is unopened and you're worried about the bill, open the bill, face the demon, and make a turn, make a negotiable turn, all the way through to how do I read a book, or do I sit and binge Netflix mindlessly, or do I doom scroll? And all these decisions you can make, but one of them will lead to a path of more enlightenment, and one will lead to the path of short-term dopaminergic hits with no longer term benefit to it. And it doesn't mean there's absolutely zero benefit in short-term dopamine hits, but if you're spending 8 to 10 hours a day on attention of meaningless things that give you nothing, I would suggest that your growth is going to be slower than someone who is taking active steps towards bettering their life.
Yeah. Amen to that. So I think that is a great note to end it on. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your knowledge, and to be vulnerable and open and to bring perspective. I appreciate perspective so much. And these are some topics that I've wanted to dive deeper into, and you brought so much on this topic. You had more than I expected, and that makes it even more fun. So thank you so much, Arky, for being here with me today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your time. I really appreciated it.